When the sun went down in Vietnam, the battlefield changed hands. Jungle shadows swallowed entire units, and isolated outposts braced for attacks that came without warning. Then, something unexpected began circling overhead. Not a jet, not a bomber, but a slow, aging cargo plane reborn for a different kind of war. Its name was the Douglas AC-47 Spooky, and when it opened fire, the night itself seemed to ignite. To some, it was salvation. To others, it was terror from above. But behind the blazing arcs of tracer rounds lies a deeper story, one of desperation, controversy, and a weapon that may have changed more than just the battlefield. From cargo plane to killing machine, a desperate experiment. By 1964, the war in Vietnam was exposing a structural weakness in American air doctrine. The U.S. military possessed overwhelming firepower, but it was optimized for conventional warfare. Fast jets, high-altitude bombers, and strike packages were designed to destroy infrastructure, armored formations, and fixed positions. In Vietnam, the enemy did not present those targets. Instead, Viet Cong units operated as decentralized guerrilla cells. They attacked at night, targeted remote outposts, and withdrew before conventional air support could respond. District towns and special forces camps were being overrun not because of insufficient weaponry, but because of a gap in sustained responsive firepower after sunset. The Air Force needed persistence, an aircraft that could loiter over a battlefield for extended periods and deliver continuous fire on a specific point. The solution emerged from an unlikely platform, the Douglas C-47 Skytrain, a World War II-era transport aircraft. Rugged and reliable, the C-47 had already proven its logistical value, but no one had designed it to be an attack aircraft. It was slow, propeller-driven, and structurally vulnerable. The concept was unconventional but mathematically sound. Instead of mounting forward-firing guns, engineers installed side-firing 7.62mm miniguns on the left side of the fuselage. When the aircraft flew in a tight pylon turn, banking at a constant angle, the guns could remain fixed on a single ground coordinate. As long as the orbit was maintained, rounds would continuously impact the same area below. The modified aircraft became the Douglas AC-47 Spooky. This was the birth of the modern gunship doctrine. The theory addressed a specific operational failure: night assaults on isolated positions. Insurgents relied on darkness to mask movement and overwhelm defenders. Conventional airstrikes arrived too late or were too brief. The AC-47 could deploy illumination flares, identify hostile fire, and maintain suppressive fire for hours. But from the outset, the program was controversial. Senior Air Force leadership questioned whether converting a cargo plane into a low-altitude gunship violated fundamental principles of survivability. The aircraft would orbit repeatedly over hostile territory, presenting a predictable trajectory. In a conflict where small arms fire was ubiquitous, that predictability was dangerous. Moreover, the aircraft lacked significant armor protection. Its engines, control surfaces, and fuel systems were not hardened for sustained ground fire. A concentrated burst from heavy machine guns could disable it. Critics argued the platform was tactically exposed in a theater where enemy air defenses were steadily improving. There were also ethical and strategic concerns. The AC-47's firepower was not precision-guided. It was suppressive and volumetric. In rural Vietnam, combatants and civilians were often intermingled. Engagements occurred near villages, rice paddies, and hamlets. Night operations complicated target discrimination. Identifying hostile forces by muzzle flashes or movement patterns carried inherent uncertainty. Was the aircraft providing close air support, or was it delivering area denial fire in populated terrain? The first major combat test came in late 1964, when Viet Cong forces assaulted a besieged outpost in the Mekong Delta. The AC-47 arrived overhead, deployed parachute flares to illuminate the battlefield, and began its orbit. Streams of red tracer rounds descended in a continuous arc. According to after-action reports, the attacking forces disengaged shortly thereafter. Operationally, the results were immediate. Requests for the aircraft increased. Ground commanders valued its endurance, the ability to remain overhead and respond dynamically as engagements evolved. Unlike jet aircraft that expended munitions in a single pass, the AC-47 could adjust fire in real time and sustain defensive coverage. However, tactical success did not eliminate structural limitations. As North Vietnamese and Viet Cong units adapted, they improved anti-aircraft capabilities. Heavy machine guns became more prevalent. Concentrated fire against a circling aircraft increased risk. Loss rates, while not catastrophic initially, reinforced concerns that the platform's survivability depended heavily on localized enemy capability rather than inherent protection. Strategically, there was another unresolved issue. Saturation fire could repel an attack, but it did not dismantle the insurgent network. The aircraft defended positions. It did not neutralize the broader political and logistical infrastructure sustaining guerrilla operations. The AC-47 represented a reactive innovation, a solution tailored to immediate battlefield deficiencies. It was effective within a narrow mission profile, defending fixed positions under night assault. Yet, its very design embodied the contradictions of the Vietnam War. Overwhelming firepower addressed tactical crises, but the broader conflict remained asymmetrical and politically complex. The transformation from cargo plane to gunship was not merely a technical modification. It reflected institutional adaptation under pressure. Faced with a war that did not conform to doctrine, the Air Force improvised. Whether that improvisation represented ingenuity or desperation depended on perspective. Night over the jungle, when villages lit up in tracer fire. Darkness in Vietnam was not passive. It was tactical. When the sun dropped behind the tree line, the balance of power shifted. Guerrilla units moved through tree cover and irrigation ditches, closing in on district towns and isolated special forces camps. Flares burned out quickly. Radios crackled with fragmented reports. By the time conventional air support arrived, attackers were often already inside the perimeter. This was the operational environment into which the Douglas AC-47 Spooky entered full combat service. Unlike fast movers that made a single strafing pass, the AC-47 did not rush the battlefield. It approached deliberately, engines droning, altitude controlled, crews scanning for muzzle flashes below. The aircraft carried parachute illumination flares that transformed darkness into harsh white daylight. Once deployed, shadows collapsed. Tree lines became silhouettes. Defensive positions were suddenly visible from thousands of feet above. For ground troops under siege, that light often meant survival. For attackers exposed in open ground, it meant vulnerability. Then came the tracers. Each of the side-mounted miniguns could fire thousands of rounds per minute. As the aircraft banked into its orbit, the guns locked onto a fixed impact point below. To observers on the ground, streams of red tracer rounds appeared to pour from the sky in a continuous arc. The visual effect was unmistakable. Entire sections of jungle seemed to ignite. American and South Vietnamese defenders described the experience as immediate relief. Positions that had been absorbing incoming fire suddenly gained overwhelming suppressive support. Viet Cong units, relying on stealth and proximity, found themselves pinned down in illuminated terrain. Assault momentum fractured under sustained fire. However, the spectacle carried strategic complications. Engagements frequently occurred near hamlets and agricultural land. The war in South Vietnam was geographically intimate. Rice paddies bordered villages. Tree lines concealed both fighters and civilians. At night, distinguishing between hostile movement and non-combatant presence was inherently difficult. Even with illumination, visibility did not equal certainty. The AC-47's firing pattern was not precision-guided in the modern sense. It was a sustained, concentrated stream directed at coordinates identified through radio communication, flare observation, or reported enemy fire. If those coordinates were wrong, the consequences were immediate and irreversible. Critics inside military planning circles raised concerns about proportionality and target discrimination. Close air support doctrine emphasized supporting friendly forces in contact while minimizing collateral damage. Yet, in counterinsurgency, the battlefield rarely offered clean separation between combatants and civilians. The visual dominance of tracer fire did not guarantee tactical clarity. There was also a psychological dimension that extended beyond immediate engagements. The aircraft's presence created a dual perception. Among Allied ground units, it became synonymous with rescue. Among opposing forces, it represented an overwhelming and persistent threat. Viet Cong fighters reportedly altered tactics when intelligence suggested a gunship might be on call. Rapid assaults were shortened. Movement under illumination became riskier. But psychological impact cuts in multiple directions. In contested villages, residents witnessed sustained aerial gunfire over their homes and fields. Even when directed at insurgent positions, the proximity of heavy machine gun fire could erode perceptions of security. Counterinsurgency strategy relied not only on defeating armed units, but on maintaining local legitimacy. Spectacular displays of force were effective tactically, yet politically complex. Operational reports from 1965 onward documented a surge in requests for AC-47 support. The aircraft proved particularly effective during attacks on district capitals and remote outposts where defenders lacked artillery depth. Its ability to remain overhead for extended periods filled a night-fighting gap that no other aircraft in theater addressed at the time. Nevertheless, vulnerabilities persisted. The aircraft's predictable orbit made it susceptible to concentrated ground fire. As enemy forces adapted, heavy machine guns were positioned to engage circling aircraft. Every minute over a target increased exposure. Crews had to balance sustained support with survivability, adjusting altitude and bank angle to reduce risk while maintaining effective fire. Night operations in Vietnam were never static. Each engagement forced rapid assessment under incomplete information. The AC-47 altered the tactical equation, but it did not eliminate uncertainty. Flares illuminated terrain. They did not simplify identification. Tracers suppressed attackers. They did not resolve the broader insurgency dynamic. What the aircraft undeniably changed was the character of night combat. Darkness was no longer a guaranteed advantage for guerrilla forces. Instead, it became a contested domain, defined by light drifting from parachute flares and arcs of red tracer fire carving circles in the sky. In those moments, villages did not simply sit in shadow. They were transformed into temporary battle arenas, suspended between illumination and gunfire, where technological improvisation confronted irregular warfare in real time, the thin line between close air support and civilian casualties. Close air support, by definition, is intimate. Aircraft are not striking distant infrastructure or strategic supply routes. They are operating in direct coordination with ground forces in contact with the enemy. In Vietnam, that intimacy was intensified by geography. Firefights unfolded inside or adjacent to populated hamlets, along irrigation canals, and across rice paddies that sustained entire communities. When the Douglas AC-47 Spooky entered sustained operations, it brought a new capability to night engagements: persistence. Unlike fast jets that executed a single high-speed pass, the AC-47 orbited for extended periods, delivering continuous suppressive fire onto a designated point below. In defensive scenarios, that persistence often meant the difference between a perimeter holding and collapsing, but the very characteristic that made the aircraft effective also complicated its use. Would illuminate the area and concentrate fire there. The assumption was that hostile forces were occupying that space. In theory, the aircraft's fixed pylon turn allowed rounds to remain tightly grouped around a coordinate, minimizing dispersion. In practice, Vietnam's battle space rarely conformed to theoretical clarity. Guerrilla forces embedded themselves within civilian populations, sometimes coercively, sometimes with local support. They launched attacks from positions that could be rapidly abandoned. A squad might fire from the edge of a hamlet and then withdraw through interconnected dwellings. By the time illumination flares revealed movement, combatants and civilians could be intermingled. Indicators were imperfect. A flicker in a tree line might be hostile fire. or a cooking flame extinguished too late. A cluster of movement might represent retreating insurgents or families fleeing gunfire. Commanders faced compressed decision cycles. Ground units under assault demanded immediate support. Delays increased casualties among defenders. The AC-47's crew had seconds to interpret radio transmissions, confirm target areas, and begin sustained fire. Precision, in that environment, was probabilistic rather than absolute. This tension produced internal debate within military planning circles. Close air support doctrine emphasizes discrimination and proportionality. The objective is to neutralize hostile forces while minimizing unintended harm. The AC-47's method, however, was saturation within a confined radius. It did not release a single ordnance guided to a discrete point. It delivered thousands of rounds over a sustained interval. Even if concentrated, the volume of fire elevated the risk profile in populated terrain. Civilian casualty assessments in Vietnam were notoriously difficult to verify. The fluid control of territory, inconsistent reporting mechanisms, and competing narratives obscured accountability. Nevertheless, the strategic implications were clear. Each incident involving non-combatant harm risked eroding local trust and strengthening insurgent propaganda. The war was not solely a contest of firepower. It was also a contest for political legitimacy. Defenders of the aircraft's use argued that failing to provide overwhelming support to besieged positions would produce greater casualties overall. If a district capital fell or a village was overrun, reprisals and executions could follow. In that calculus, rapid and forceful intervention was framed as protective, even if imperfect. Critics countered that heavy-handed firepower in civilian-adjacent areas could generate long-term instability. Counterinsurgency depends on separating insurgents from the population. If aerial suppression blurred that separation, it risked undermining the very objective it sought to secure. The line between necessary force and excessive force was not drawn on a map. It shifted with each engagement, each radio call, each illumination flare drifting downward. The AC-47 did not operate in isolation. It functioned within a broader strategy struggling to reconcile military dominance with political fragility. Ultimately, the aircraft embodied a core paradox of the conflict. It provided life-saving support to troops under immediate threat. At the same time, its method of delivering that support operated in an environment where certainty was elusive and consequences extended beyond the battlefield. In Vietnam's night battles, the distinction between close air support and collateral damage was not theoretical. It was negotiated in real time, under fire, with incomplete information, and with stakes that extended far beyond the orbit of a single aircraft. Slow, loud, and vulnerable. A flying target in hostile skies. In conventional air warfare, survivability is built on speed, altitude, electronic countermeasures, and unpredictability. The aircraft that dominate contested skies are designed to minimize exposure time and maximize maneuver advantage. The Douglas AC-47 Spooky was engineered for none of those principles, yet it was routinely tasked with operating in some of the most hostile night environments of the Vietnam War. The foundation of the problem was aerodynamic and tactical at the same time. The AC-47's entire combat doctrine relied on a continuous pylon turn, meaning the aircraft had to bank at a steady angle and maintain a circular orbit around a fixed point on the ground. This geometry allowed its side-mounted miniguns to concentrate fire precisely on a designated coordinate, but it also meant that the aircraft's flight path became mathematically predictable. Any force observing the pattern could estimate where the aircraft would be seconds later and adjust their aim accordingly. Predictability in combat aviation is a liability, particularly in a theater where even lightly equipped insurgent units possessed heavy machine guns capable of reaching low-flying aircraft. Early in its deployment, the AC-47 benefited from limited organized anti-aircraft resistance in certain regions, which contributed to the perception that its risk profile was manageable. However, as North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces expanded their access to heavier weapons, including 12.7mm anti-aircraft machine guns, the calculus shifted significantly. The aircraft's speed compounded the danger. Built on a World War II-era transport platform, it was propeller-driven and comparatively slow, especially when maintaining an orbit designed for sustained fire accuracy. In order to keep rounds tightly grouped on the ground, the pilot could not simply accelerate away without disrupting the firing solution. Every additional orbit increased the exposure window, and every exposure window increased the statistical probability of a damaging hit. Night operations did not conceal the aircraft as effectively as one might assume. Illumination flares deployed to reveal enemy positions also silhouetted the gunship against the sky. The aircraft's own tracer rounds, streaking downward in bright arcs, marked its position with dramatic clarity. To hostile forces below, the orbit was visible and trackable, particularly once they learned to anticipate the pattern. Concentrated return fire along a predictable segment of the circle could turn the engagement from suppressive dominance into a survival contest. Structural vulnerability was an unavoidable reality. The AC-47 was not originally armored to withstand sustained ground fire, and although modifications were implemented, its engines, control systems, and fuel tanks remained exposed relative to purpose-built attack aircraft. A penetrating round in a critical component could degrade performance immediately, and engine failure while orbiting under fire presented a dangerous scenario requiring rapid altitude and power management. Crews were trained to respond to such contingencies, but training did not eliminate the inherent fragility of the platform. Damage reports following missions frequently revealed the extent of exposure. Maintenance crews documented fuselages riddled with bullet holes, wing surfaces scarred by shrapnel, and systems strained by repeated stress cycles. Even when aircraft returned safely, the cumulative wear was evident. The cost of persistence was written in metal fatigue and repair hours, underscoring that every successful defense of a ground position came with mechanical consequences. Beyond the physical risks, there was a psychological dimension that distinguished AC-47 crews from many other aviators in theater. Fast jet pilots often entered hostile airspace briefly, delivered ordnance, and exited at high speed. Gunship crews remained overhead for extended durations, hearing the impact of incoming rounds against the airframe and knowing that each minute increased vulnerability. The decision to stay on station was rarely abstract. It was tied directly to radio calls from ground forces under immediate threat. Leaving early might preserve the aircraft and crew, but it could also expose a besieged outpost to overrun. Remaining in orbit strengthened the defensive perimeter below, yet increased the odds of sustaining critical damage. This tension defined many missions, forcing commanders and crews to weigh tactical necessity against survivability in real time. As the conflict evolved, the limitations of the platform became increasingly evident within strategic planning circles. The demand for more heavily armed and better protected gunships signaled recognition that the AC-47, while innovative, operated at the edge of acceptable risk in increasingly contested airspace. Its vulnerability was not incidental. It was embedded in the very design that made its mission possible. In hostile skies over Vietnam, the aircraft demonstrated that persistence could reshape night combat dynamics, but it also exposed the cost of improvisation in a war that continuously adapted to counter new threats. The AC-47 was effective, but effectiveness did not equate to invulnerability, and every orbit over contested terrain carried the implicit understanding that technological ingenuity could not fully eliminate the dangers of a predictable path through hostile fire. Firepower as psychological warfare, breaking the enemy or fueling resistance. Warfare is not only a contest of attrition but also a contest of perception, and in Vietnam, that distinction carried strategic weight. Tactical victories meant little if they failed to influence morale, recruitment, and civilian allegiance. The deployment of the Douglas AC-47 Spooky introduced a form of aerial firepower that was as psychological as it was physical, raising a fundamental question. Did overwhelming night fire break insurgent momentum, or did it deepen resistance? The AC-47's operational effect was immediate and visible. When called to defend a village or outpost, It illuminated the battlefield with parachute flares and established a continuous orbit. From the ground, the red streams of tracer rounds appeared as sustained arcs of light descending from the sky, creating the impression of relentless mechanical precision. For defenders, that display often signaled relief and reinforcement. For attacking forces caught in the open, it represented exposure and suppression. Psychologically, the impact on small unit engagements was significant. Guerrilla warfare depends heavily on initiative and surprise. Night assaults aimed to overwhelm defenders before organized resistance could stabilize. The arrival of a persistent gunship disrupted that momentum. Assault elements that expected limited resistance instead encountered continuous suppressive fire, forcing dispersal and withdrawal. In immediate tactical terms, the aircraft often achieved its objective, breaking attacks before they could achieve decisive penetration. However, psychological warfare operates beyond the boundaries of a single firefight. Insurgent movements are resilient precisely because they are decentralized and ideologically motivated. A repelled assault does not necessarily translate into diminished long-term resolve. Instead, heavy-handed force can alter narratives within affected communities. If the display of firepower is perceived as disproportionate or indiscriminate, it risks reinforcing the insurgent portrayal of external forces as destructive rather than protective. Vietnam's rural terrain complicated this equation. Engagements frequently unfolded near inhabited areas, and even when gunship fire was directed at confirmed hostile positions, the proximity of civilians amplified the visual and emotional intensity of the event. Villagers did not experience the engagement as an abstract military maneuver. They experienced it as illumination flares drifting over homes and sustained gunfire echoing across fields. In such contexts, the line between reassurance and intimidation could blur. From a strategic communications perspective, the spectacle of the AC-47 cut in multiple directions. Allied forces often highlighted its effectiveness in defending vulnerable positions, emphasizing that its presence saved lives and prevented massacres. Conversely, opposing narratives framed sustained aerial fire as evidence of excessive reliance on technological superiority against lightly equipped fighters. In insurgent propaganda, even defensive operations could be reframed as aggressive overreach. Another dimension of psychological impact concerned escalation. Once insurgent units recognized the pattern of gunship deployment, they adjusted tactics. Attacks were shortened or repositioned, and heavy weapons were prepared to target circling aircraft. This adaptation indicates that the psychological shock effect diminished over time as familiarity increased. The first encounters may have induced hesitation or confusion, but repeated exposure fostered countermeasures. Moreover, the spectacle of overwhelming firepower risked creating a paradox within counterinsurgency doctrine. Successful counterinsurgency aims to separate insurgents from the civilian population and build local trust in government forces. While the AC-47 could decisively protect a threatened position, its dramatic display of force sometimes overshadowed the subtler political efforts necessary to stabilize contested regions. Firepower could suppress an attack, but it could not, by itself, resolve underlying grievances or dismantle support networks. Operational reports from the mid-1960s frequently praised the gunship's deterrent value. Outposts that previously expected nightly assaults sometimes experienced reduced attack frequency after repeated gunship-supported defenses. Yet, correlation does not always imply causation. Insurgent forces often shifted focus geographically rather than abandoning offensive intent entirely. In that sense, the aircraft may have displaced pressure rather than eliminated it. The broader strategic question remains complex. In the short term, sustained aerial fire disrupted enemy operations and imposed tangible costs on attacking units. In the longer term, however, reliance on conspicuous technological dominance risked reinforcing the asymmetry that insurgent narratives exploited. Psychological warfare is most effective when it weakens enemy cohesion without alienating neutral populations. Achieving both simultaneously in Vietnam proved extraordinarily difficult. The AC-47 exemplified this tension. Its firepower was undeniable, and its presence frequently altered the outcome of night engagements. Yet, psychological effects cannot be measured solely by repelled assaults. They must also account for how communities interpret the force applied in their vicinity. In Vietnam's contested landscape, every display of dominance carried dual potential: to intimidate adversaries and to influence the perceptions of those living beneath the orbiting aircraft. Internal doubts, command tensions, and the ethics of saturation fire. Innovation in wartime is rarely unanimous. While the Douglas AC-47 Spooky earned praise from ground commanders who witnessed its immediate battlefield impact, its growing role in Vietnam also triggered unease within higher levels of command. The debate was not about whether the aircraft could repel attacks. It was about what its method of doing so meant strategically, institutionally, and ethically. At the tactical level, the AC-47 filled a gap that had become painfully obvious. Isolated outposts were vulnerable to coordinated night assaults, and traditional air support lacked endurance. The gunship's ability to loiter for hours and deliver continuous fire provided a form of aerial artillery that could be called upon rapidly. For field commanders focused on survival and perimeter integrity, this capability was difficult to argue against. However, strategic planners viewed the aircraft through a broader lens. Counterinsurgency is not simply about defeating enemy units. It is about shaping political conditions and maintaining legitimacy. Saturation fire, even when concentrated within a defined orbit, carried reputational risks in a conflict already scrutinized internationally. The war in Vietnam was not fought in isolation. It unfolded under global observation, where civilian harm and proportionality were increasingly debated. Within Air Force circles, another tension emerged concerning doctrine and institutional identity. The service had invested heavily in high-speed jet aircraft, strategic bombing concepts, and technological superiority. The AC-47 represented a departure from that trajectory. It was slow, propeller-driven, and based on a transport platform from a previous era. Its success suggested that unconventional solutions were necessary in irregular warfare, a reality that challenged established procurement priorities and doctrinal assumptions. Command discussions therefore extended beyond performance metrics. Questions were raised about scalability and sustainability. Could a fleet of aging transports be relied upon indefinitely in contested airspace? Would expanding the gunship concept divert resources from other strategic priorities? Some officers supported refining the model with improved armor and heavier armament, while others argued that reliance on such platforms risked entrenching a reactive posture rather than addressing systemic issues in the conflict. Ethical considerations added another layer of complexity. The AC-47's method of delivering fire was not analogous to precision-guided munitions that would become prominent decades later. Its strength lay in sustained volume within a defined area. Even when carefully coordinated with ground forces, the density of fire raised concerns about proportionality in populated environments. Commanders had to reconcile the imperative to protect Allied forces with the obligation to minimize unintended harm. After-action reports often framed gunship deployments as defensive necessities, emphasizing that they were called in when friendly positions were under direct assault. Yet, internal reviews sometimes examined whether alternative responses could have achieved similar outcomes with lower collateral risk. These discussions were not uniform accusations of misconduct. Rather, they reflected an awareness that tactical efficiency does not automatically equate to strategic prudence. Inter-service dynamics also played a role. Coordination between U.S. forces and South Vietnamese units introduced variability in target reporting and engagement protocols. Differences in communication clarity, situational awareness, and rules of engagement occasionally complicated decision-making. In such circumstances, approving sustained aerial fire required confidence in ground intelligence that was not always absolute. There was also the issue of perception within the ranks. Aircrews understood the protective value of their missions, but they were not insulated from broader debates about the war's trajectory. Reports of civilian displacement and contested legitimacy filtered through military channels. While their immediate focus remained mission execution, the knowledge that their firepower existed within a politically charged environment was inescapable. As the conflict intensified and enemy air defenses improved, command-level evaluation increasingly favored the development of more advanced gunships with enhanced survivability and targeting systems. This evolution implicitly acknowledged both the effectiveness and the limitations of the AC-47 model. It also reflected a desire to align tactical capability with emerging ethical and operational expectations. The internal doubts surrounding the aircraft did not negate its battlefield contributions. Instead, they highlighted a fundamental tension inherent in counterinsurgency warfare: how to apply decisive force without undermining strategic objectives rooted in population security and political legitimacy. The AC-47 stood at the intersection of those competing demands. In Vietnam, command decisions were rarely binary. They were shaped by incomplete information, evolving enemy tactics, and the pressure to protect forces under immediate threat. The debates over saturation fire were not abstract philosophical exercises. They were part of an ongoing effort to determine whether short-term battlefield dominance aligned with long-term strategic coherence.